Hey everyone, I am so incredibly excited to share this with you today. We're diving into a beautifully resilient, super intimate snapshot of history drawn straight from our source material. So, the setting is San Diego, January and February of 1944. Now, the world outside, it's completely gripped by the massive, high stakes of the Second World War. But inside one specific home, a family is navigating these complex, dual realities. On one hand, deep grief. On the other, the beautiful, just unrelenting demands of everyday life. It's an absolutely incredible story of resilience from two people named Betty and Fred and their baby, Randy.
Okay, let's jump right in with a really powerful thought from the text. Life, which pauses for grief but does not stop, resumed its forward motion. You see, the source material doesn't just dwell purely on sadness. Instead, it focuses heavily on the momentum of living. Fred and Betty have just faced this profound personal loss. They recently had a funeral for someone very dear named Della. But time, as it literally always does, pushes forward. And this delicate, absolutely necessary balance of moving forward while still carrying what you've lost, that anchors everything we're going to explore today.
Part 1. Life resumes its motion. Finding normalcy. So, right after the funeral, Fred and Betty had to just step right back into their daily routines. For Fred, that meant heading back to Rohr, the aircraft manufacturing company where he worked. And what's really fascinating about the source material here is how it describes his return. He didn't just, trudge back to work miserably. He actually found profound comfort there. He's managing requisition orders, tracking materials, dealing with the super predictable logistics of supplying a warplane production line. When your personal life has just been completely shaken by grief, the structured, logical demands of a job, especially one where you know exactly what you're doing, can actually act as a really vital anchor of normalcy. Fred was good at this work, and knowing that gave him a safe place to steady himself.
Section 2. Randy's Growing World, Baby Milestones.
Now, while Fred is at the plant, Betty's days are completely filled with the consuming reality of having an almost 4-month-old. Over just a few short weeks, we can map out Randy's rapid development. And we aren't just looking at physical growth here. We are literally watching the emergence of a human personality. In week 1, we see him making conversational cues, so not crying, but using a social voice, actually taking turns vocalizing back and forth with Betty. By week 3, we get the first real smile. Week 4, he's reaching for objects with clear intent. And by early February, he's sleeping a massive 7 hours. Let's actually break a couple of these milestones down because they are incredibly significant.
So, thinking about that third week, the first smile. The source text explicitly notes this wasn't just some newborn reflex. It wasn't a gas bubble, it was deliberate, it was directed, and it illuminated his entire face. Just imagine that moment for a second. Fred is getting ready for work, leans over the bed, hums to his son, and Randy looks right into his eyes and flashes a genuine smile. It's a tiny, almost microscopic event in the grand scheme of a world at war in 1944, right? But for a father navigating grief, that directed, deliberate smile is basically an entire universe of joy.
But, it wasn't all just sweet smiles. Randy also started developing some very strong, totally unyielding opinions about his daily care. The source material is actually kind of hilarious about this. Apparently, he had a strictly limited tolerance for being on his stomach. When he was in his crib, he absolutely had to face the window, like so much so that Betty just gave up trying to face him any other way. And my personal favorite, he required a highly specific song during diaper changes. The only problem, he couldn't actually tell them which song it was yet. It's just a beautiful, really funny reminder of how demanding everyday parenthood can be.
And then we get to a glorious number, 7. That is the number of magnificent hours Randy finally slept straight through the night. The text notes that Fred and Betty discussed this development with the kind of absolute reverence that's usually reserved for major historical events. And honestly, if you've ever been a tired parent, you know that a sudden 7-hour stretch of continuous sleep feels like an absolute miracle.
Section 3. Connection amidst the war. Dinner with friends.
Now, this brilliantly illustrates the core contrast of our source material. On a macro level, out there in the city, San Diego is just churning with wartime business. The men at the table are engaged in serious, high-stakes conversations about the war in the Pacific. But on a micro-reality level, right there at their table, it's loud and it's wonderful. A friend named Eleanor is telling a story about escaped chickens with such perfect comic timing that people can barely even drink their water. There's overlapping laughter, discussions of reading lists, and just the really easy comfort of established friendships. Amidst all this wonderful, overlapping laughter, Fred takes a quiet moment. He looks down the restaurant table at his friends, and he sees his wife laughing, and he thinks back to a letter he wrote to Betty at Christmas. He thinks to himself, the ordinary days,
The whole list. This was on the list. He was certain of it. It's just such a profound internal realization. In the middle of a world at war, living in the shadow of a recent personal loss, this exact moment, good food, a warm restaurant, laughing friends, is exactly what makes life worth living. It's the very thing he is fighting to hold on to.
Section 4. Finding the Ordinary Days. Valentine's Day, 1944.
So, Valentine's Day in 1944 actually fell on a Monday, which, let's be honest, isn't traditionally ideal for a big night out. But Fred didn't care. He orchestrated this evening meticulously. Step 1. Fred takes that intense logistical focus from the Roar aircraft plant and uses it to meticulously book a table at the super elegant U.S. Grand Hotel. Step 2. He tells Betty exactly which burgundy dress to wear. Step 3. Eleanor Stedham enthusiastically steps in to babysit Randy, bringing her knitting and a super cheerful attitude. It's just this perfectly executed, loving plan to give Betty the wonderful evening she so deserves.
And this presents a really striking juxtaposition. Outside the windows of the U.S. Grand Hotel, it's a wartime Monday. There are shortages, men in uniform everywhere, military jeeps rolling by, and naval ships just waiting out in the dark harbor. The future of the entire world is completely unresolved. But inside, at their table for two, Fred is in a sharp new charcoal suit with silver cufflinks. Betty looks beautiful in her burgundy dress. They're sharing a second glass of wine. Inside, they're completely reclaiming their personal world, carving out this little sanctuary of romance and normalcy against the backdrop of total global chaos. During this dinner, with the room sort of soft around them, they finally talk about everything that matters, including their recent loss, Della. Because, well, grief doesn't exactly follow a schedule, right? And at this table, it's allowed to just naturally surface. Betty brings up the Christmas letter Fred had written her, and it's a beautiful exchange. Fred says it came out sideways. He basically feels he didn't express his emotions perfectly. But Betty responds, it came out perfectly. It came out exactly like you. It really highlights the deep, comforting emotional resonance between them. They don't need grand, poetic perfection. They literally just need each other's genuine, authentic selves.
Section 5. The Quiet Hours. Early Morning Stillness.
Betty wakes up suddenly in the dark. But not because the baby cried. She wakes up with this sudden jolt of irrational alarm, specifically because Randy hadn't cried. Once the sound of his steady breathing reaches her through the open door, she relaxes. But she stays awake. She just lies there in the good dark, listening to her son breathe, listening to her husband sleep. And in that quiet, she remembers words spoken by Della, the woman they recently laid to rest. Mine. After all the journeying, mine. It is a hauntingly beautiful moment. Betty is realizing the profound, grounding weight of her family, of having a safe place and people to call her own after all the sorrow and all the journeying they've been through.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer of the source material today. So, what are the ordinary days you are fighting for? Fred and Betty found their salvation and their strength in the micro-joys, a baby's very first deliberate smile, a loud dinner with friends, a quiet Valentine's date amidst a literal war, the comforting sound of breathing in the dark. In our super fast-paced, often chaotic modern lives, what are the small, beautiful, ordinary moments that anchor you? Think about that today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep finding your ordinary days.